come on in and make yourselves at home. Welcome to my life. I know everything's gonna be all right. Welcome to my world. Oh, won't you come on in? Welcome to my life. It's known as the Tiger's Den. Greetings to all of my subscribers. I want to thank you for being with me for as long as you have, and the new subscribers that's coming on in. We want to say greetings and thank you for your time. This is from Toothless and the moderators. Welcome to the Tiger's Den. Greetings. This is the voice of Cheryl, and I am Toothless Tiger. Today, I'm going to be going back to a book that I started reading a couple of months ago, Toxic Parents. And we're going to pick up where we left off, chapter 7. Toxic parents overcoming their hurtful legacy and reclaiming your life. This book is for adult children of toxic parents. Any child, actually, that's, I would say, 18 and up. And especially if, you feel as an individual, if you're listening to this video, you should be 18 and up anyway. That maybe something is missing in your life and you don't know exactly what it is. Perhaps you can read a book and it may help you understand some of the things that you go through or have gone through. Perhaps you haven't gone through any of this, and you might want to share it with someone that you know that have gone through this. I'm doing this under Title 17 U.S. Code 107, Limitation on Exclusive Rights for Fair Use of the Copyright Act. The fair use of copyright material without permission is allowed when used for commentary, criticism, education, research, scholarship, and teaching. In addition, YouTube has laxed some of the sexual content that they will allow due to those very reasons. A lot of people were letting them know that it's very hard to speak on these type subjects to assist others when you're being held like you're doing something wrong. So even in AdSense, they made it where that we are not violating any rules, any community guidelines or terms of service. So I'd like to go back to chapter 7. We left off on chapter 6. The ultimate betrayal, the sexual abusers. Incest is perhaps the cruelest, most baffling of human experiences. It is a betrayal of the most basic trust between child and parent. It is emotionally devastating. The young victims are totally dependent on their aggressors, so they have nowhere to run, no one to run to. Protectors become persecutors, and reality becomes a prison of dirty secrets. Incest betrays the very heart of childhood, its innocence. In the last 2 chapters, we have looked into some of the darker realities of toxic families. We have met parents who have an extraordinary lack of empathy and compassion for their children. They batter their children with every weapon from degrading criticism to leather belts, and they still rationalize their behaviors as acts of discipline or education. But now we enter into a realm of behavior so perverse that it defies rationalization. This is where I must leave behind the strictly psychological theories. I believe that sexual violation of children is a genuinely evil act. And that's Dr. Susan Forward writing this. What is incest? Incest is difficult to define because the legal and psychological definitions are worlds apart. The legal definition is extremely narrow, usually defining incest as sexual intercourse between blood relations. As a result, millions of people did not realize they were incest victims because they had not been penetrated. From a psychological point of view, incest covers a much wider range of behaviors and relationships. These include physical contact with the child's mouth, breast, genitals, anus, or any other body part that is done for the purpose of sexually arousing the aggressor. That aggressor does not have to be a blood relative. He or she can be anyone whom the child perceives as a family member, such as a step parent or an in law. There are other types of incestuous behaviors that are extremely damaging, even though they may not involve any physical contact with the child's body. For example, if an aggressor exposes himself or masturbates in front of a child, or even persuade the child to pose for sexually suggestive photographs, he is committing a form of incest. We must add to our definition of incest that the behavior has to be kept secret. A father who affectionately hugs and kisses his child is doing nothing that needs to be kept secret. In fact, such touching is essential to a child's emotional well being. But if that father strokes the child's genitals or makes the child stroke his, that is an act that must be kept secret. That is an act of incest. There are also a number of far more subtle behaviors that I call psychological incest. Victims of psychological incest may not have been actually touched or assaulted sexually, but they have experienced an invasion of their sense of privacy or safety. I'm talking about invasive acts like spying on a child who is dressing or bathing, or repeatedly making seductive or sexually explicit comments to a child. While none of those behaviors fits the literal definition of incest, the victims often feel violated and suffer many of the same psychological symptoms as actual incest victims do. The incest myth. When I first began my efforts to raise public awareness about the epidemic proportions of incest, I met with tremendous resistance. There is something particularly ugly and repellent about incest that keeps people from wanting even to acknowledge that it exists. In the last 10 years, denial has begun to give way in the face of overwhelming evidence, and incest has become an acceptable, if still uncomfortable, topic for public discussion. But another obstacle still remains: the incest myths. They have long been articles of faith in our mass consciousness, beyond challenge, but they are not true, and they never were. Myth. Incest is a rare occurrence. Reality. All responsible studies and data, including those from the U.S. Department of Human Services, show that at least 1 out of every 10 children is molested by a trusted family member before the age of 18. Only as recently as the early 1980s did we begin to realize just how epidemic incest is. Prior to that time, most people believed that incest occurred in no more than 1 out of 100,000 families. Myth: incest happens only in poor or uneducated families or in isolated, backward communities. Reality: incest is ruthlessly democratic. It cuts across all socioeconomic levels. Incest can occur as early in your family as in the back hills of Appalachia, and that was as easily in your family as in the back hills of Appalachia. Myth: incest aggressors are social and sexual deviants. Reality: the typical incest aggressor can be anybody. There is no common denominator or profile. They are often hardworking, respectable, church going, seemingly average men and women. I've seen aggressors who wore police suits. They were police officers, school teachers, captains of industry, society matrons, bricklayers, doctors, alcoholics, and clergymen. The traits they possess in common are psychological rather than social, cultural, racial, or economic. Myth: incest is a reaction to sexual deprivation. Reality: most aggressors have active sex lives within marriage and often through extramarital affairs as well. They turn to children either for feelings of power and control or for the unconditional, non threatening love that only children can provide. Although these needs and drives become sexualized, sexual deprivation is rarely the trigger. Myth: children, especially teenage girls, are seductive and at least partially responsible for being molested. Reality: most children try out their sexual feelings and impulses and innocent and exploratory ways with people to whom they are bonded. Little girls flirt with their fathers and little boys with their mothers. Some teenagers are openly provocative. However, it is always 100% the adult's responsibility to exercise appropriate control in these situations and not to act out their own impulses. Myth: most incest stories are not true. They are actually fantasies derived from the child's own sexual yearnings. Reality: this myth was created by Sigmund Freud and has permeated psychiatric teaching and practice since the beginning of the century. In his psychoanalytic practice, Freud was getting so many reports of incest from the daughters of respected middle class Viennese families that he groundlessly decided that couldn't all be true. To explain their frequency, he concluded that the events occurred primarily in his patients' imaginations. The legacy of Freud's era is that thousands, perhaps millions, of incest victims have been, and in some cases continue to be, denied the validation and support they need, even when they are able to muster the courage to seek professional help. Myth: children are molested more often by strangers than by someone they know. Reality: the majority of sexual crimes committed against children are perpetrated by trusted members of the family. We're going to the next phase. Such a nice family. As with physical abusers, most incest families look normal to the rest of the world. The parents may even be community or religious leaders with reputations for high moral standards. It's amazing how people can change behind closed doors. Tracy, 38, is a slender, brown haired, brown eyed woman who owns a small bookshop in a suburb of Los Angeles. She came from one of those normal families, quote unquote. We looked like everybody else. My father was an insurance salesman and my mother was an executive secretary. We went to church every Sunday and we went on family vacations every summer. Real normal Rockwell stuff. And I think that's Rockwell, Norman Rockwell stuff. Except when I was about 10, my father started pushing his body up against mine. About a year later, I caught him watching me getting dressed through a hole he had drilled in the wall of my bedroom. As I started developing, he would come up behind me and grab my breast. Then he'd offer me money to lie on the floor with him with my clothes off so he could look at me. I felt really dirty, but I was afraid to say no. I didn't want to embarrass him. Then one day, he took my hand and put it on his penis. I was so scared. When he started to fondle my genitals, I didn't know what to do, so I just did what he wanted. To the outside world, Tracy's father was a typical middle class family man. And imagine that added to Tracy's confusion. Most incest families maintain this facade of normalcy for many years, sometimes forever. Liz, an athletic looking, blue eyed blonde videotape editor, provides a particularly dramatic example of the split between outward appearance and reality. Everything was so unreal. My stepfather was this popular minister with a real big congregation. The people who came to church on Sunday just loved him. I remember sitting in church and listening to him sermonize about mortal sin. I just wanted to scream out that this man is a hypocrite. I wanted to stand up and testify in front of the whole church that this wonderful man of God is screwing his 13-year-old stepdaughter. Liz, like Tracy, came from a seemingly model family. Her neighbors would have been astounded to discover what their minister was doing. But there was nothing unusual about the fact that he held a position of moral leadership, authority, and trust. A prestigious career or a graduate degree does nothing to curb incestuous impulses. Question: how could this ever happen? Controversial theories abound about the family climate and the role that other family members play. In my experience, however, one factor always holds true. Incest simply doesn't happen in open, loving, communicative families. Instead, incest occurs in families where there is a great deal of emotional isolation, secrecy, neediness, stress, and lack of respect. In many ways, incest can be viewed as part of a total family breakdown, but it is the aggressor and the aggressor alone who commits the sexual violence. Tracy described what it was like in her house. We never talked about how we felt. If something bothered me, I just pushed it down. I do remember my mom cuddling me when I was little, but I never saw any affection between my mother and my father. We did things together as a family, but there was no real closeness. I think that was what my father was looking for. Sometimes he would ask me if he could kiss me, and I would say I didn't want to. Then he'd beg me and say he wouldn't hurt me. He just wanted to be close to me. It had not occurred to Tracy that if her father was lonely and frustrated, he had alternatives to molesting his daughter. Like many aggressors, Tracy's father looked within the family to his daughter in an attempt to make up for whatever deprivation he experienced. The distorted use of a child to take care of an adult's emotional needs can easily become sexualized if that adult cannot control his impulses. The many faces of coercion. There is a tremendous amount of psychological coercion inherent in the parent child relationship. Tracy's father didn't need to force his daughter into a sexual relationship. I would have done anything to make him happy. I was always terrified when he was doing that stuff to me, but at least he never got violent with me. Victims like Tracy, who have not been physically coerced, often underestimate the damage they've suffered because they don't realize that emotional violence is every bit as destructive as physical violence. Children are by nature loving and trusting, easy marks for a needy, irresponsible adult. A child's emotional vulnerability is usually the only leverage some incest aggressors need. Other aggressors reinforce their psychological advantage with threats of bodily harm, public humiliation, or abandonment. One of my clients was 7 when her father told her he would put her up for adoption if she didn't give in to his sexual demands. To a little girl, the threat that she would never see her family or friends again was terrifying, enough to persuade her to do anything. Incest aggressors will also use threats to guarantee their victim's silence. Among the most common: 1, if you tell, I'll kill you. 2, if you tell, I'll beat you up. 3, if you tell, mommy will get sick. 4, if you tell, people will think you're crazy. 5, if you tell, nobody's going to believe you. 6, if you tell, mommy will get mad at both of us. 7, if you tell, I'll hate you for as long as you live. Number 8, if you tell, they'll send me to jail and there won't be anyone to support the family. These sorts of threats constitute emotional blackmail, preying on the naive victim's fears and vulnerabilities. In addition to psychological coercion, many aggressors resort to physical violence to force their children to submit to incest. Incest victims are rarely favored children, even apart from the sexual abuse. A few may receive money or gifts or special treatment as part of the coercion, but the majority are abused emotionally and often physically. Liz remembers what happened when she tried to resist her minister stepfather. When I was almost out of junior high, I got real brave and told him that I decided he had to stop coming into my room at night. He got furious and started choking me. And then he started screaming that God didn't want me to make my own decisions. The Lord wanted him to decide for me, like God really wanted him to have sex with me or something. By the time he got through choking me, I could hardly breathe. I was so scared that I let him do it too. Me right then and there. Mm. Why children don't tell. 90% of all incest victims never tell anyone what has happened or what is happening to them. They remain silent, not only because they are afraid of getting hurt themselves, but to a great extent because they are afraid of breaking up the family by getting a parent into trouble. Incest may be frightening, but the thought of being responsible for the destruction of the family is even worse. Family loyalty is an incredibly powerful force in most children's lives, no matter how corrupt that family may be. Connie, 36, a dynamic redhead who was a loan officer for a large bank, was a classic loyal child. Her fear of hurting her father was losing his love was more powerful than any desire to get help for herself. Looking back, I realized that he had me right where he wanted me. He told me that it would be the end of the family if I said anything to anybody about what we were doing, that my mother would send him away and I wouldn't have a daddy anymore, that they'd send me away to a foster home, and that everyone in the family would hate me. In those rare instances where incest is discovered, the family unit very often is shattered, whether by divorce, other legal proceedings, removal of the child from the home, or the intense stress of public disgrace. Many families cannot survive the exposure of incest. Even though the breakup of the family may well be in the child's best interests, the child invariably feels responsible for that breakup. This adds greatly to his or her already overwhelming emotional burden. Next, the credibility gap. Sexually abused children realize early that their credibility is nothing compared to their aggressors. It doesn't matter if the parent is alcoholic, chronically unemployed, or prone to violence. In our society, an adult is almost always more believable than a child. If the parent has attained a certain measure of success in life, the credibility gap becomes a chasm. Dan, 45, an aerospace engineer, was sexually abused by his father from the time he was 5 until he went away to college. Even when I was little, I knew I could never tell anybody about what my father was doing to me. My mother was totally dominated by him, and I knew she'd never believe me in a million years. He was a big deal businessman. He knew everybody worth knowing. Can you imagine me trying to get people to believe that this big honcho was making his 6-year-old son give him blowjobs almost every night in the bathroom? Who'd believe me? They'd all think I was trying to get my father into trouble or something. I just couldn't win. Dan was caught in a terrible trap. Not only was he being molested, but it was by a parent of the same sex. This compounded both his shame and his conviction that no one would believe him. Father son incest is far more common than most people realize. Such fathers usually appear to be heterosexual, but they are probably driven by strong homosexual impulses. Rather than admit their true feelings, they attempt to repress their homosexuality by marrying and becoming parents. With no outlet for their true sexual preference, their repressed impulses continue to grow until eventually they outweigh their defenses. Dan's father's assaults began 40 years ago when incest, as well as homosexuality, was shrouded in misconceptions and myths. Like most other incest victims, Dan sensed the hopelessness of trying to seek help because it seems preposterous that a man of his father's social status could commit such a crime. Parents, no matter how toxic, have a monopoly on power and credibility. Statement: I feel so dirty. The shame of the incest victim is unique. Even very young victims know that incest must be kept secret. Whether or not they're told to keep silent, they sense the forbiddenness and shame in the behavior of the aggressor. They know that they are being violated, even if they are too young to understand sexuality. They feel dirty. Just as verbally and physically abused children internalize blame, so do incest victims. However, in incest, the blame is compounded by the shame. The belief that it's all my fault is never more intense than with the incest victim. This belief fosters strong feelings of self loathing and shame, in addition to having somehow to cope with the actual incest. The victim must now guard against being caught and exposed as a dirty, disgusting person. Liz was terrified of being found out. I find I was only 10, but I felt like I was the worst slut there ever was. I really wanted to tell on my stepfather, but I was afraid everyone, including my mom, would hate me for it. I knew that everybody would think I was bad. I couldn't stand the thought that I would be the one coming off as evil, even though that's how I felt. So I just pushed it all down inside. It's hard for outsiders to understand why a 10-year-old whose stepfather is forcing her to have intercourse with him would feel guilty. The answer, of course, lies in the child's unwillingness to see the trusted parent as bad. Somebody has to take the blame for these shameful, humiliating, frightening acts. And since it can't be the parent, it must be the child. The feelings of being dirty, bad, and responsible create tremendous psychological isolation for incest victims. They feel totally alone, both within the family and in the outside world. They think no one will believe their horrible secret. Yet that secret so overshadows their lives that it often prevents them from making friends. The isolation, in turn, can force them back to the aggressor, who is often their only source of attention, no matter how perverse. If the victim experiences any pleasure from the incest, his or her shame is magnified. A few adults who were victims recall sexual arousal from the experience, regardless of the confusion or embarrassment they felt. It is even harder for these victims to later renounce their sense of responsibility, and that's actually renounce their sense of responsibility. Tracy actually had orgasms, she explained. I knew it was wrong, but it did feel good. The guy was a real bastard to me, to do it to me, but I am as guilty as he. because I liked it. I'd heard the same story before, but it still tore at my heart. I told Tracy, as I told others before her, there is nothing wrong with liking the stimulation. Your body is biologically programmed to like those feelings. But the fact that it felt good didn't make what he was doing right. And it didn't make you wrong. You were still a victim. It was his responsibility as an adult to control himself, no matter what you felt. There is one more guilt that is unique to many incest victims: taking father away from mother. Father daughter victims often talk about having felt like the other woman. This, of course, made it even harder for them to seek help from the one person they might have had reason to expect it from, their mother. Instead, they felt they were betraying mother, adding yet another layer of guilt to their inner world. Statement: insane jealousy. You belong to me. And that is not the Carly Simon version. This is so very disheartening. Incest fuses the victim to the aggressor in a crazy and intense way. In father daughter incest, in particular, the father often becomes obsessed with his daughter and insanely jealous of her boyfriends. He may beat her or verbally abuse her to drive home the message that she belongs to only one man, daddy. This obsession dramatically distorts the normal development stages of childhood and adolescence. Instead of being able to become progressively more independent from parental control, the incest victim is increasingly bound to the aggressor. In Tracy's case, she knew that her father's jealousy was crazy, but she didn't see how cruel and degrading it was because she confused it with love. It is common for the incest victims to mistake obsession for love. Not only does this drastically alter their ability to understand that they are being victimized, but it can wreak havoc with their expectations of love later in life. Most parents experience some anxiety when their children begin dating and start bonding to people outside of the family. But the incestuous father experiences this normal stage of development as betrayal, rejection, disloyalty, and even abandonment. Tracy's father reaction was typical: rage, accusations, and punishment. He would wait up when I was out on a date, and when I got home, he'd give me the third degree. He would question me endlessly about who I was going out with, what was I doing with him, where was I letting him touch me, and did I let him put his tongue in my mouth. If he so much as caught me kissing a boy goodnight, he'd come out of the house screaming, "Tramp!" and scare the guy off. When Tracy's father called her vile and insulting names, he was doing what many incestuous fathers do: removing the badness, the evil, and the blame from himself and projecting it onto her. But other aggressors bond their victims with tenderness, making it even harder for the child to resolve the conflicting emotions of guilt and love. Statement: You're my whole life. Doug, 46, a slight tense man who worked as a machinist, came to me because of a wide range of sexual difficulties, including recurrent impotence. He had been molested by his mother from the age of 7 to his late teens. She would fondle my genitals until I had an orgasm, but I always thought that because there was no intercourse, it was no big deal. She made me do the same to her. She told me I was her whole life and that this was her special way of showing her love to me. But now, every time I try to get close to a woman, I feel like I'm cheating on my mother. The enormous secret Doug shared with his mother bound him tightly to her. Her sick behavior may have confused him, but her message was clear. She was the only woman in his life. This message was in many ways as damaging as the incest itself. As a result, when he attempted to separate and have adult relationships with other women, his feelings of disloyalty and guilt took a terrible toll on his emotional well being and sexuality. Capping the volcano. The only way many victims can survive their early incest traumas is to mount a psychological cover up, pushing these memories so far beneath conscious awareness that they may not surface for many years, if ever. Incest memories often come flooding back unexpectedly because of some particular life event. I've had clients report memories being triggered by such things as the birth of a child, marriage, death of a family member, seeing something about incest in the media, or even reliving the trauma in a dream. It is also common for these memories to surface if the victim is in therapy working on other issues, though many victims still won't mention the incest without prodding from the therapist. Even when these memories emerge, many victims panic and try to push them back by refusing to believe them. One of the most dramatic emotional experiences I've ever had as a therapist was with Julie, 46, a PhD in biochemistry, who was on the staff of a large research center in Los Angeles. Julie came to see me after hearing me discuss incest on one of my radio programs. She told me that she had been molested by her brother from the age of 8 until she was 15. I've been having these terrible fantasies about dying or going crazy and ending up in an institution. Lately, I've been spending most of my time in bed with the covers pulled over my head. I never leave the house except to go to work, and I'm barely functioning there. Everyone's really worried about me. I know it's all connected to my brother, but I just can't talk about it. I feel like I'm drowning in this. Julie was very fragile, apparently on the verge of a serious breakdown. She would laugh hysterically one minute and break into convulsive sobs the next. She had almost no control over the emotions that were overwhelming her. My brother raped me the first time when I was 8. He was 14 and really strong for his age. After that, he forced himself on me at least 3 or 4 times a week. The pain was so unbearable that I sort of went away from myself. I realize now that he must have been pretty crazy because he'd tie me up and torture me with knives, scissors, razor blades, screwdrivers, anything he could find. The only way I could survive was to pretend that this was happening to someone else. I asked Julie where her parents were while these horrors were taking place. I never told my parents anything about what Tommy was doing to me because he threatened to kill me if I did, and I believed him. My dad was a lawyer who put in 16-hour days, including weekends, and my mom was a pill junkie. Neither one of them ever protected me. The few hours that dad was home, he wanted peace and quiet, and he expected me to look after mom. My whole childhood seems like one big blur of nothing but pain. Julie had been badly damaged and was frightened of therapy, but she mustered the courage to enter one of my incest victim groups. For the next several months, she worked hard on healing from her brother's torturous sexual abuse. Her emotional health improved noticeably during those months, and she no longer felt as if she was walking a tightrope between hysteria and depression. Yet, despite her improvement, my instincts told me that something was missing. There was still something dark and hidden festering inside her. One night she came to group looking distraught. She had had a sudden memory that frightened her. A couple of nights ago, I had this real clear memory of my mother forcing me to perform oral sex on her. I really must be crazy. I was probably imagining all those things about my brother, too. This could just never have happened with my mother. Sure, she was doped up all the time, but she just couldn't have done that to me. I'm really losing it. Susan, you've got to put me in the hospital. I said, sweetie, if you imagine the experiences with your brother, then how come you've improved so much by working on them? That made some sense to her. I continued, you know, these things don't generally come out of the people's imaginations. If you're remembering this incident with your mother now, it's because you're stronger than you were. You were more able to deal with it now. I told Julie that her unconscious had been very protective of her. Had she remembered this episode when she was as fragile as when I first met her, she might have had a total emotional collapse. But through her working in group, her emotional world was becoming more stable. Her unconscious had allowed this repressed memory to surface because she was ready to cope with it. Few people talk about mother daughter incest, but I have treated at least a dozen victims of it. The motivation appears to be a grotesque distortion of the need for tenderness, physical contact, and affection. Mothers who are capable of violating normal maternal bonding in this way are usually extremely disturbed and often psychotic. It was Julie's struggle to repress her memories that brought her close to a breakdown. Yet, as painful and disturbing as those memories were, their release was the key to Julie's progressive recovery. Statement: a double life. Incest victims often become very skillful child actors. In their inner world, there is so much terror, confusion, sadness, loneliness, and isolation that many develop a false sense, a false self, with which to realize, let me start over. Many develop a false self with which to relate to the outside world, to act as if things were fine and normal. Tracy talked about her as if self with considerable insight. I felt like I was two people inside one body. In front of my friends, I was very outgoing and friendly, but as soon as I was in our apartment, I became a total recluse. I have these crying jags that just won't stop. I hated socializing with my family because I had to pretend that everything was fine. You have no idea how hard it was to keep playing these two roles all the time. Sometimes I felt like I didn't have an ounce of strength left. This chapter is pretty long. And I think with it being as long, I'm going to read this last part and then I'm going to do a part two of chapter seven. I did not realize it would be so long. And perhaps what's going on, because I am an incest survivor, and so some of the pain and the anguish, although I had none of that as a kid, because I did not recall what happened to me until I was 19 years old. So I had no knowledge of all of this kind of stuff happening. But I tell you, it is devastating at any point in time when it becomes your reality and you have to deal with it. And there really is help available. And I don't know if there is a number here in this book, but I will Google it in case anybody needs to talk with anybody. Uh, that's non judgmental. I'm going to finish now. Dan, too, deserved an Oscar, he described. I was feeling so guilty about what my father was doing to me at night. I really felt like an object. I hated myself, but I played the part of a happy me, and nobody in the family caught on. Then all of a sudden, I stopped dreaming. I even stopped crying. I'd pretend I was happy. I was a happy kid. I was the class clown, and I was a good piano player. I loved to entertain, anything to get people to like me. But inside, I was aching. I was a secret drunk by the time I was 13. By entertaining other people, Dan was able to feel some sense of acceptance and accomplishment. But because the real self inside him was in such agony, he experienced very little genuine pleasure. This is the cost of living a lie. And on that note, I will get ready to close. This will be part A of chapter 7. I hope that you're still with me at this point of the video. And if you are in need of, like I said, speaking with anyone, I will provide a number. They have a um, national hotline. and it's 24 hours. I'm looking for the phone number. It is 1-800-656-4673. And the number again is toll free, 1-800-656-4673. And it goes by RAINN. RAINN stands for the R word, Abuse and Incest National Network. RAINN. And so you can call 24 hours for victims of sexual assault. Callers are routed automatically to the closest member or crisis center for counseling. And more than 890 centers participate in the network. They also have a website, and that is www.rainn.org, and then the backslash. Again, I will put that inside the description. It is my hope that these readings will help you if you are a victim of toxic parents, toxic family. We all have dysfunction to some degree or another. But if you can relate to any of these stories that Dr. Susan Forward shares, it is my hope that you will get help and that you will heal. I know for me, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to share my life and my story. I'm 65 today, but I was a victim and I did not know it until I was 19. And then I had to deal with it from that point up to today. But I was fortunate enough to be a person who, at the time, I was a born again Christian and truly a reader of the word and believer of the word. And I also had loving mother and father who had no knowledge of what was happening to me, and no one else knew it. We have a very loving family, and even my oldest brother, the one that actually did the deed, there was no penetration. But again, as she said, it is just as devastating, especially when it comes back to your memory and you're awake and it appears to be a dream. I've told my story and it's out on video, but just for those who know nothing about me and just tuning in and want to see what this is about, it's about truth. It's about transparency. It's about morality. It's about love. It's about family. It's about reclaiming yourself and being free to be who you are. And then not being ashamed if you want to forgive a person or if you don't want to forgive a person, being able to take control of who you are as an individual and being the best you that you can be. So hopefully you will visit my page. Hopefully you will subscribe and even become a member or be a supporter of the page. That is my Cash App there. However you choose to do it, it's okay. As long as I do my thing, and this is my purpose in life, is to give. Because I was taught that you can only keep what you have by giving it away. And so that's what I'm willing to do in my reasonable service. I always, almost always in my videos with this song, and it's my rendition of Whitney Houston's Greatest Love of All. And I chose that song because that song tells us that the children are our future. But if, and many of us are, if we're growing up in different types of homes like this, and I would suggest if you're just tuning in to this chapter to go back and hear the other chapters, or better yet, get the book, Toxic Parents. overcoming their hurtful legacy and reclaiming your life. And this, everybody did not have toxic parents. They did not. I didn't have parents that did any of the things in here, but we yet still had a dysfunctional family. So, you don't have to make up anything to make anything fit or work. Just allow it to be. Allow yourself to be, and whatever was will come. Trust me. And join me on Wednesday as we speak on the 7 Hermetic principles and understanding the basis and the foundation of principle living and nature's God and nature's law. And whatever you believe, you're free to believe it. I just ask if you would listen. You may learn something, or you may can teach me something. I'm willing to learn. And on that note, I am going to get ready to leave the tiger's den. But before I go, let me play my song. Have a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful day. And again, join me on Wednesday as we continue with the Kybalion. And that will be Wednesday, the 29th, I believe that is, at 8:15 p.m. Central Standard Time. Once again, before I go, let me just say that number, if you are in need or know of someone that may be in need of any type of assistance, and I mean speaking with someone on these issues that I just read about, the number is 1-800-656-4673. Now, I did not dial the number to see if it is a working number, but it is current, I believe, here on Google. And then there is a website. So until the next chapter or part 2 of this chapter, have a beautiful and productive day. I'm leaving the tiger's den. Goodbye. I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. Show them all the beauty they possess inside. Give them a sense of pride to make it easier. Let the children's laughter remind us who we used to be. Everybody's searching for a hero. People need someone to look up to. I never found anyone to fulfill my needs. A lonely place to be. So I learned to depend on me. I decided long ago never to walk in anyone's shadow. If I failed, if I succeed, at least I'll live as I believe. No matter what they take from me, they can't take away my dignity, because the greatest love of all is happening to me. I found the greatest love of all inside of me. The greatest love of all is easy to achieve. Learning to love yourself is the greatest love of all. And if by chance that special place that you've been dreaming of takes you to a lonely place. Find yourself in love.